Hi guys, welcome to today's episode of Love Domini, where we'll discuss everything in our healing journeys, from relationships, toxic behaviors, how do we get healthier relationships, and just how do we really learn to go on this journey of healing and be the best version of ourselves. I'm so excited to talk to you guys today about how we are crazy when we try and control situations in our relationships. And why is it that as women, it's like we have this urge and this need to control everything? So I'm going to start today's episode by sharing something with you guys. So you'll remember in the very first video that I put out, I spoke about being on a journey of singleness, and that I've been single at that point for a really long time. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about some scenarios that have come up since I have started dating, which has been really, really, really recent and is still really, really, really new. But I just wanted to share with you guys because really it's in this season, in the last few weeks, that some really serious toxic behaviors of my own that I really thought that I had got to grips with have started to surface, and I touched on that last week, and so I just wanted to go into that a little bit more today in the context of control. So I'm going to start by sharing a scenario with you guys that really happened, and it's one of those ones that I'm sure a lot of us women in particular can relate to, where we say to the person that we're arguing with, or like our significant other, we tell them to go away. And we tell them to go away as in like leave the house or leave the vicinity where we are, in a way that suggests that we don't want them there anymore. But when they actually go away, we're like, what are you doing? What do you mean you've left? Like, but we've told them to leave, right? So in this scenario, myself and the guy that I'm dating had, well, as in he didn't know that we had anything wrong, but in my head, I'd started to go into my pangs of rejection, and my attachment system was triggered, and I responded in a way that was very passive aggressive. And I said a few not very nice things and then just got really frustrated. And this was all happening in my head. He knew nothing about it. But I then said to him, right, I think you should go now anyway, because I've got something at this time. And so you should just go. Okay, see you later, bye. And I closed the door and went into the bathroom. I come out of the bathroom about 10 minutes later, and I was showering, by the way, not anything else. And I come out of the bathroom 10 minutes later and he's gone. And I'm like, where's he gone? Because in my head, what had happened in the bathroom is like, I'd thought about, oh my gosh, I must be being so horrible. Like, I need to go out there and apologize. And yeah, like was ready to come out and like say sorry. And then I come out and he's gone. And so I ring him and he's like, you told me to go, Domini. And I'm like, yeah, but I didn't really mean it. And he's like, what are you doing? Like, are you playing games? And we've had all these conversations prior to this about, you know, how we want to have a healthy relationship and a healthy approach to a relationship, and therefore communication being the most important thing in that. And both really agreed and have had talks about strategies and things that we can do. As early on as it is, I've already had to share some of my vulnerabilities that I've shared with you guys and some of the needs that I have in terms of my issues around rejection and attachment and so on. And so we've had some great conversations already, which has led me to believe that I am able to be vulnerable with him and to have a level of conversation. Anyway, so he's like, what are you doing? Are you playing games? And I was like, no, it's not a game. I'm not playing games. And I completely meant this. Like in my head, I wasn't playing a game. It's not as though I was like, right, I'm going to ask him to leave and then he's going to do this. And then he's, you know, there wasn't like a strategy. It was just an emotional reaction. And anyway, as a result, and I'll talk about kind of how we came back from that in a second. But the point is that in my head, it's like I said this thing to try and control the situation. And then when he left, I'm like, what are you doing? I didn't want you to go. So it was my own manipulative self that had come out in this situation to try and control the outcome. And when I step back to really consider this and to really think about, okay, what just happened for me? Like, what emotions did I go through? How was that triggered? And how did I get to this place where obviously I'm game playing and that's not where I want to be? And so I really thought it through and spoke to a lot of friends, and I had a couple of therapy sessions, and I had some conversations with him, and really got to a point where I realized that my behavior was from a place where I was trying to meet a need within myself to control the situation so that I did not become vulnerable and I did not feel shame. And so much of that comes from our childhood. And I've touched on this before. And last week actually mentioned this book, and it's called Healing the Shame That Binds You. And I'll put a note to this book in the show notes below. I'll put a link to it. But I just wanted to read something that it says about our needs. It says, when our needs as children are neglected, we're given the message that they're not important, and they lose a sense of their own personal value, as in the person loses a sense of, we lose a sense of our own personal value because we feel as though our needs are not important. As our needs are chronically rejected, as children, we stop believing that we have the right to depend on anyone. And then it goes on to say that we feel shame when we feel needy. And so what's really interesting about this is I remember when I was in a relationship with somebody who was in addiction recovery, and because they were going to alcohol, AA and engaging in that, I was engaging with Families Anonymous. And at the time, I'd started to realize my own behaviors and issues around codependency. And so I'd started engaging in CODA, which is Codependency Anonymous. And essentially, it's a 12-step program, really similar to that for people experiencing addictions, and you go and you kind of explore your emotions and talk about how you can have healthier relationships. But the irony of it is that rule number 1 in the 12 steps of Codependency Anonymous is really similar to that in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's the rule that we admitted we were powerless over others and that our lives had become unmanageable. And so essentially it's this idea that we can't control anybody else but ourselves. And so rule number 1 is remembering that the only person, the only behavior we can control is our own. And of course we know that to be true as adults, generally, intellectually, we know that to be true. So why then in a relationship does there suddenly become this codependence on the other person to meet and fulfill our needs? And when they don't, the emotional response, or more so reaction, that we have is so toxic and damaging. I read something the other day and it said, arguing is toxic, debating is healthy, and conversation is crucial. And it's this idea that actually we have to be able to communicate, and we have to be able to be vulnerable with our needs and what it is that we need from the other person. And so in the scenario I've just talked about, the mistake I made was 1, not communicating anything at all other than aggression and trying to control and manipulate a situation, and 2, getting really aggressive because I hadn't really rectified what it was, the need that wasn't being met at the time. So anyway, we had, myself and this guy had this amazing then conversation about following the incident. And it really was a few days later, because actually what happened after the incident is that we both went into our places of pain. And from that place, we kept going around in circles. And I was talking in a therapy session. My therapist said, you know, it's so interesting that in a romantic relationship, more than any other relationship, our inner child is triggered so much. And that's often why you'll see couples that argue in such an immature and a way that you just look at them and you think, gosh, I've never seen this person like that before. And certainly I know for myself, I've been in situations where I'm like, who am I? I don't even recognize myself. And it's often because our inner child, that little person whose needs weren't met, is arguing with the other person's inner child. And so it's like two 4-year-olds going at each other and having that argument. And it's from those places of pain and shame that then we're trying to communicate. And actually there's no communication that can happen when we're in that space, because we're not able to be vulnerable, because we're trying to protect ourselves. We're trying to cover up any feelings of shame. And that's what we do when we try and push away vulnerability. We block intimacy. And so in trying to control, it's like the ultimate barrier, the ultimate villain to intimacy, because we try and control so that we don't become vulnerable and we don't feel shame, but then we block intimacy and the potential for intimacy in our relationships. And this whole reflection was so useful, because then when I spoke to him, I was able to say, you know, when you tell me no about something, I need you to frame it in a way that breaks down the why not. So because the word no speaks to my rejection, I need to understand why you can't do that thing at the time. And he said to me, oh, okay, so I need to speak to you like you're a 4-year-old. And I was like, what? Thinking he was taking the mick and being really rude. And he was like, no, so genuinely, I need to break it down for you like a child, so that that's how you receive it, the information. And obviously, I'm responsible for doing this for myself. But the point is that I was able to communicate to him, look, when you do it like this is how it makes me feel. If you were able to do it like this, I think there could be a different outcome. And so it was super amazing, because he really understood this idea of like, yes, that is exactly what it is. It's like, if we can speak to that other person's inner child and be aware that at that point of feeling upset or triggered in some way, instead of arguing and presenting toxic behavior, there is an opportunity for us to take a step back and reflect on, what is the need that I am not getting met here, and how can I communicate that to the other person, so that when we do have a conversation, my inner child, and therefore my immaturity, really is what we're talking about. When we say inner child, it sounds like super therapy speak or whatever. But essentially it's that. It's like, how do we make sure that annoying, irritating, toxic little person inside of us, that also is beautiful and needs protecting, but that little inner immature us is not the voice that is triggered in the situation of conflict. And I think what's great about this is, when you think about codependency and you think about somebody who's codependent, they come across as so needy. And that is what we are. When we're codependent, it's like we need somebody else to meet our needs because we're unable to meet them for ourselves. When actually, it's not the neediness that the other person doesn't like. It's not the neediness that is the off-putting thing. But because sometimes we feel like we don't want to come across as needy, we may not communicate something. But in actual fact, it's not the neediness that is off-putting. It's the not having the vulnerability and the transparency that allows for positive communication that becomes the block. And we feel as though that's the neediness that comes out. And we feel as though then it's the need to control, or that is certainly what is presented to the other person. It's like, oh, they just want to control us, when actually it is from a place of trying to meet our own needs. So it's not the neediness that we should be fearful of. It's because actually we can articulate and communicate that to somebody, and that can help to build intimacy. But it's the feeling of not doing that. It's when we don't communicate feelings of vulnerability that then we come across as controlling. So like in the 12 steps, there is a process of recovery. There is a way to get out of this toxic cycle and to stop presenting these behaviors of trying to control situations. And I genuinely have experienced just in this short time of dating this person that it's the first time that I've been able to go to somebody and communicate that, you know what, as insecure as this makes me feel to tell you this thing, actually, I have to tell you this because if I don't, I'm blocking intimacy and I'm blocking the ability to have a healthy relationship with you. And if I tell you and you reject me because of it, or you think I'm needy or whatever, then clearly we're not ever going to have a level of intimacy in a relationship that will allow for us to be healthy anyway. But if that other person can receive that, can hold that, and can just accept you, you know, can just meet you with acceptance of that is who you are and try and do something differently the next time, then you know that you're on the path to a healthy relationship. That does not mean it's not going to be painful and there aren't going to be times where your inner child gets into an argument with theirs and you guys have arguments, but the more we can minimize that, the better, the more effective our communication will be, and the more effective our relationship with each other will be. The more intimacy we'll have, the more we'll want to spend time with that person, the less controlling and needy we will seem. And so a big part of that is the communication, but also knowing what our boundaries are, knowing when to say no, knowing that we need to meet and show up for ourselves, and by doing all of the little habits and the healthy behaviors things that we might have implemented to make sure that we're okay, exercise and eating and speaking with friends and seeing friends and not becoming completely focused and obsessed with them, spending time with God or meditating or whatever your spiritual practice is. All of those things keep us emotionally healthy, that then when we show up to the other person, we're showing up from a place of fullness, not neediness and control. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that today and that there was just something that you were able to take from it. For me, one of the biggest learning points of this week and going through some of these scenarios has been the ability to understand how my pain is going to speak to the pain of the other person, and how because of that we could go around in circles. And so actually being able to take a step back and say, wait there, what is it inside of me that this is triggering, and what is it inside of you, and how do we prevent and avoid that as we move forward in this relationship. And if you're dating somebody at the moment, I would just encourage you to try and have one of these conversations. And if you're not dating somebody, then stock it all up, because the time is going to come around and hopefully we will be in the best place to receive the love that we deserve. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and if you haven't followed me yet on Instagram, I am at Love Domini. And guys, if there was something in this video today that resonated with you, please comment below. It just helps me to understand what are the kind of topics that you want to hear about, what things are useful, and what is it that you feel is you're able to take away from this, because I want these videos to be really useful for people, not just to have a bit of a chat, but actually to share with you guys what I feel is being revealed in my life, and hopefully be able to help you guys too. So lots of love guys, and see you next week.